Have you ever noticed how easily your sense of peace can disappear when someone else does not approve of you? Maybe you make a decision, and for a moment it feels right. You feel calm, you feel certain. But then someone questions it. Someone disagrees, someone becomes distant, someone does not respond the way you hoped. And suddenly, something inside you shifts. You begin reconsidering everything. You replay the conversation. You wonder whether you said too much, whether you should have behaved differently, whether they misunderstood you, whether you should explain yourself. And slowly, almost without noticing, the decision that once belonged to you begins to belong to someone else. This is one of the quietest ways a person can lose themselves. It does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like being agreeable. Sometimes it looks like being endlessly understanding. Sometimes it looks like waiting for someone's message before allowing yourself to feel okay. Sometimes it looks like choosing the safer career, the more acceptable relationship, the more impressive lifestyle, or the version of yourself that receives the most approval. You may still appear confident. You may still accomplish things. You may still tell yourself that you are independent. But somewhere underneath all of it, there may be a question you keep asking without realizing it. Will they approve of me? Carl Jung's psychological work offers a powerful way of understanding this struggle. Jung was deeply interested in the tension between the person we become for the outside world and the person we are becoming within ourselves. He believed that psychological development involves a movement toward greater wholeness, toward becoming more conscious of what is genuinely ours, rather than simply absorbing the expectations of the collective world around us. And this is why putting yourself first is not the same thing as becoming selfish. It is not about becoming cold. It is not about ignoring people. It is not about refusing to care. It is not about walking away from every relationship that challenges you. And it certainly does not mean believing that your needs are always more important than everyone else's. Putting yourself first means something much quieter. It means stopping the habit of abandoning your own inner truth simply because someone else might not like it. It means learning to hear your own voice before the voices of everyone around you become louder. It means understanding that approval can be pleasant, but it cannot become the foundation of your identity. Because there is a strange paradox here. The more desperately you try to be accepted, the less connected you become to the very qualities that make you worthy of genuine connection. You become careful, predictable, adaptable. You become skilled at giving people what they want to see. And eventually you may reach a point where everyone seems comfortable with you, yet you are no longer comfortable with yourself. That is where the deeper journey begins. The first thing you have to recognize is that seeking approval is rarely just about wanting compliments. Beneath it, there is often a much older psychological pattern, the belief that safety comes from being accepted. Think about a child entering a room full of adults. Before the child understands social rules intellectually, the child learns them emotionally. A smile brings warmth. A frown brings uncertainty. Approval creates connection. Disapproval creates distance. Over time, the mind learns to monitor the environment. What makes people happy? What causes rejection? What version of me receives affection? What version of me creates conflict? This ability is useful. Human beings are social creatures. We need relationships. We need cooperation. We need belonging. The problem begins when adaptation becomes identity. You stop thinking, I am choosing to behave this way because it reflects who I am, and start thinking, I must behave this way because otherwise they may not accept me. The difference is subtle, but psychologically enormous. One comes from choice, the other comes from fear. And when fear becomes the hidden reason behind your behavior, you can become extremely successful at living a life that does not feel like yours. Jung's concept of the persona helps us understand this. The persona is essentially the social face we present to the world. It is not inherently false or bad. Every healthy human being has different roles. You speak differently at work than you do with a close friend. You behave differently with the stranger than with someone you deeply trust. You have responsibilities, social expectations, and boundaries. The persona becomes a problem when you forget that it is a role. You begin to believe the mask is your entire identity. You become the successful one, The agreeable one, the strong one, the easygoing one, the attractive one, the intelligent one, the dependable one, the person who never needs anything, the person who never says no, the person who always understands. And once people become attached to that version of you, you may become afraid to change it. Because what happens if the agreeable person finally disagrees? What happens if the strong person admits that they are tired? What happens if the person who always understands finally says, "That hurt me"? What happens if the person who has spent years being easy to love finally becomes honest about what they need? The fear is often not simply that people will disagree. The deeper fear is that they will leave. And this is where approval becomes a psychological currency. You give pieces of yourself in exchange for emotional security. You suppress an opinion and receive peace. You hide a need and receive acceptance. You say yes when you want to say no and receive approval. You remain silent about something important and avoid conflict. At first, this seems like a good trade, but eventually the cost becomes too high. Because every time you betray something essential within yourself to maintain someone else's approval, you teach your own mind a dangerous lesson. Their comfort matters more than my truth. Do that often enough, and you no longer need anyone else to silence you. You learn to silence yourself. This is why putting yourself first begins with noticing the moments when you leave yourself. Not the dramatic moments, the tiny ones. The moment you change your opinion because someone looks disappointed. The moment you apologize even though you did nothing wrong, simply because you cannot tolerate their discomfort. The moment you cancel something meaningful to you because someone might think you are selfish. The moment you check your phone repeatedly because another person's response has become the emotional verdict on your day. The moment you achieve something and immediately wonder whether other people will be impressed. These moments reveal where your psychological center is located. Is it inside you, or is it somewhere outside, waiting for other people to tell you how to feel? Imagine a compass. A compass does not become more accurate because 10 people around it point in the same direction. It simply continues pointing toward its own magnetic reference. But a person who constantly seeks approval can become like someone carrying 10 different compasses, each one pointing somewhere different. One person says, "Be more ambitious." Another says, "Slow down." One says, "You should settle down." Another says, "You are too independent." One says, "You care too much." Another says, "You don't care enough." And if you allow every voice to determine your direction, eventually you become exhausted not because life is too difficult, but because you are trying to live 10 different lives at once. Putting yourself first means beginning to ask a different question. Not, what will make everyone happy? But, what is actually right for me? That question may feel uncomfortable at first. It may even feel selfish. But discomfort does not automatically mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes discomfort is simply what happens when an old pattern stops getting what it wants. If you have spent years receiving emotional security through approval, choosing yourself will initially feel like danger. You may feel guilty. You may feel uncertain. You may feel the urge to explain yourself. You may want to go back and make everyone comfortable again. But that moment is important, because it gives you a chance to discover whether you are making a decision from your values or from your fear. There is a difference between guilt and conscience. Guilt says, "They are unhappy with me, therefore I must be wrong." Conscience asks, "Did I violate something that I genuinely believe is right?" Those are not the same question. Someone else's disappointment is not automatically evidence of your wrongdoing. Someone else's anger is not automatically proof that you were cruel. Someone else's rejection is not automatically proof that you are unworthy. And this is one of the hardest lessons in emotional maturity. You can be a good person and still disappoint people. You can be loving and still have boundaries. You can care deeply and still say no. You can understand someone's feelings without allowing those feelings to control your decisions. This is where putting yourself first begins to become a practice rather than an idea. You start noticing how often you ask for permission to be yourself, and then slowly you stop asking, not because you no longer care what anyone thinks, but because their opinion is no longer the final authority over your identity. There is another layer beneath this, however. Sometimes you think you are seeking approval from other people when you are actually seeking approval from an internalized version of them. You may be alone in your room and nobody is judging you, yet you still hear a voice saying they would think this is ridiculous. They would say you are behind. They would think you are not successful enough. They would say you should be doing more. They would think you are wasting your life. Who is they? Sometimes there is no specific person anymore. The outside world has been absorbed into your inner world. This is one of the more profound consequences of living for approval. Eventually, you no longer need someone standing in front of you. You carry their gaze inside your own mind. You become both the performer and the audience. You perform, then you judge the performance. You make a decision, then you imagine how it will look. You accomplish something. Then you compare it to someone else's achievement. You rest. Then you feel guilty because someone else is working. You choose a quieter life. Then you wonder whether people will think you lack ambition. Your life becomes a stage on which you are constantly watching yourself. And this is exhausting. Jung's emphasis on individuation points toward another possibility, becoming more consciously yourself rather than simply becoming a successful version of what the surrounding world expects. Individuation is not about becoming isolated from humanity. It is about becoming more differentiated. You begin to distinguish between what you genuinely believe and what you have merely inherited. You ask which desires belong to you, which ambitions are yours, which fears are yours, which standards did you consciously choose, and which ones entered your mind because you were afraid of being considered inadequate. This can be uncomfortable because self-discovery does not always confirm the identity you have built. You may discover that some goals you chased were never deeply meaningful to you. You may realize that you wanted recognition more than the achievement itself. You may realize that a relationship was built partly around being needed rather than being known. You may realize that your constant busyness was protecting you from having to ask what you actually wanted. This is why genuine self-prioritization is not simply about doing more things for yourself. Sometimes putting yourself first means doing less. Less explaining, less proving, less comparing, less performing, less checking, less chasing, less trying to control how people interpret you, and more listening, more observing, more honesty, more patience, more willingness to sit with yourself without immediately reaching for external confirmation. This is where solitude becomes important, not loneliness. Solitude. There is a difference. Loneliness says, nobody is here for me. Solitude says, I am finally here with myself. For someone who has spent years seeking approval, solitude can initially feel strangely uncomfortable. When there are no messages, no social media, no conversations, no one to impress, no one to reassure you, the noise becomes quieter. And when the noise becomes quieter, things that were hidden can become audible. You may notice how much you compare yourself. You may notice how often you imagine other people's judgments. You may notice how much of your ambition is connected to proving something. You may notice that you do not actually know what makes you happy when nobody is watching. That realization can hurt. But it can also be the beginning of freedom. Imagine a lake. When the wind constantly moves across the surface, the water reflects the sky in fragments. Everything is distorted by movement. But when the wind becomes still, the surface becomes clear. The lake did not create the reflection. The stillness simply allowed you to see it. Your inner life can be like that. Constant external stimulation creates movement. Other people's opinions create movement. Comparison creates movement. Validation creates movement. Fear creates movement. And sometimes the answer is not to find another opinion. It is to become still long enough to hear your own. This is why putting yourself first requires learning how to tolerate being misunderstood. This may be one of the deepest forms of emotional independence. Because if your identity depends on being correctly understood by everyone, you will spend your entire life explaining yourself. You will rewrite messages, clarify intentions, defend decisions, prove that you meant well. Try to convince people that your heart is good. But no matter how carefully you explain yourself, someone will misunderstand you. Someone will interpret your silence incorrectly. Someone will dislike your boundary. Someone will think you changed. Someone will say you are selfish. Someone will not understand why you chose a different path. And if your peace depends on correcting every misunderstanding, you will never be free. This does not mean you should never communicate. Healthy communication matters. But there is a difference between explaining yourself because clarity is necessary and explaining yourself because you cannot tolerate someone having the wrong opinion of you. The first comes from responsibility. The second often comes from insecurity. Ask yourself the next time you feel an overwhelming need to explain, am I trying to communicate or am I trying to control their perception of me? That question can change a lot, because sometimes the most mature response is not another explanation. Sometimes it is acceptance. They may not understand, and I can still be okay. They may disagree, and I can still respect myself. They may leave, and I can still remain connected to who I am. This is not emotional coldness, it is emotional grounding, and grounding becomes especially important in relationships, because relationships are one of the places where approval seeking becomes most powerful. You may begin to monitor another person's mood. If they are warm, you feel secure. If they become distant, you panic. If they respond quickly, you relax. If they take longer, your mind starts creating stories. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe they are losing interest. Maybe I should send another message. Maybe I should become more available. Maybe I should become less available. Maybe I should say what they want to hear. And suddenly, instead of participating in a relationship, you are managing the emotional temperature of the relationship every second. You are no longer simply asking, do the first enjoy being with this person? You are asking, do they still approve of me? That shift changes everything, because attraction, love, and connection become secondary to emotional survival. Putting yourself first in a relationship means remembering that the relationship is not the only thing you are evaluating. You are evaluating it too. Not only do they want me, but do I feel respected here? Not only are they attracted to me, but can I be myself around them? Not only will they choose me, but is this relationship something I would choose? But these questions bring your center back to you, and that is not a manipulation technique, it is self-respect. There is a particular kind of relationship anxiety that comes from believing that another person's choice determines your value. If they choose you, you feel worthy. If they reject you, you feel defective. But rejection and worth are not the same category. Someone can reject you because the timing is wrong, because their needs are different, because they are emotionally unavailable, because they want another kind of relationship, because they simply do not feel the same connection. None of these automatically tell you what you are worth. The mistake is turning another person's preference into a verdict on your identity. This is why you have to separate preference from value. Someone not choosing your work does not mean you have no talent. Someone not choosing a relationship with you does not mean you are unlovable. Someone not understanding your path does not mean your path is meaningless. Someone not applauding your growth does not mean the growth is not real. Approval is information. It is not identity. And once you understand that distinction, you become much harder to manipulate, because people can no longer control your entire emotional state simply by giving or withholding approval. This does not mean you become impossible to influence. Healthy people should remain open to feedback. If someone you trust points out something about you that you cannot see, listen. Self-prioritization is not stubbornness. It is not saying I am always right. It is saying I am responsible for deciding what I believe after I have listened. That is a very different kind of strength. You listen without surrendering yourself. You consider without automatically obeying. You receive criticism without turning it into shame. You receive praise without turning it into dependency. And slowly, your emotional center moves inward. This is where inner discipline becomes essential. Because once you stop seeking approval, you need something else to guide you. Otherwise, you may simply replace external validation with another form of distraction. You need values. You need principles. You need commitments that remain meaningful even when nobody is watching. Think about the person who only exercises when someone notices. The person who only creates when people applaud. The person who only studies when others praise them. The person who only feels productive when their effort is visible. That person is not necessarily undisciplined. They may simply have trained their nervous system to associate action with external reward. But there is another form of discipline. The discipline of doing what matters because it matters. Reading when nobody knows. Working on something quietly. Keeping a promise you made to yourself. Taking care of your body without posting it. Learning without announcing it. Walking away from something unhealthy without needing everyone to understand why. Choosing peace without making a performance of it. This kind of growth is almost invisible, and that is exactly why it is powerful. Because when nobody is watching, you discover whether the commitment belongs to you. There is something psychologically freeing about doing meaningful things without needing them to become part of your public identity. You no longer have to turn every improvement into evidence. You can simply live it. And this is where the tree metaphor becomes useful. A tree does not spend its energy trying to convince the world that it has roots. The roots grow underground. Nobody applauds them. Nobody sees them. But when the storm arrives, the roots become visible through what they allow the tree to withstand. Your inner life works in a similar way. The boundaries nobody sees. The decisions nobody applauds. The temptations you quietly resist. The standards you keep when nobody would know if you broke them. The moments when you choose your values over approval. Those are your roots. And eventually people may notice the stability above the surface. But by then, the real work has already happened underneath. There is another powerful shift that occurs. When you begin putting yourself first, you stop confusing attention with love. This is especially important in a world where visibility can feel like significance. Someone notices you, someone compliments you, someone watches your story, someone likes your photograph, someone sends a message. For a moment, you feel important. But attention is not necessarily intimacy. Recognition is not necessarily connection. Being desired is not necessarily being understood. And being constantly noticed can actually make you more dependent if you begin using attention as proof that you matter. You can become addicted to the emotional high of being seen. Then, when attention disappears, you feel invisible. The goal is not to become someone who never enjoys attention. The goal is to become someone who does not disappear when attention does. That is a profound difference. Because when your sense of self remains intact without an audience, you become much freer in your relationships. You can enjoy affection without begging for it. You can appreciate compliments without needing them. You can love someone without making them responsible for your identity. You can miss someone without abandoning yourself to get them back. You can care deeply without losing your center. And perhaps most importantly, you can walk away when something violates your deepest values without feeling that you are walking away from your own worth. This is what putting yourself first ultimately becomes. Not a slogan, not an attitude, a psychological position. You become the person responsible for your inner life. You stop handing that responsibility to the crowd. You stop expecting another person to constantly reassure you that you are enough. You stop expecting achievement to prove that you deserve respect. You stop expecting attention to prove that you matter. You stop expecting everyone to understand your choices before you allow yourself to make them. And something inside you becomes quieter. Not because the world has become quieter, but because you have stopped allowing every external sound to become an internal command. At some point, you may notice something strange. You will still care what people think. You will still experience rejection. You will still feel hurt when someone disappoints you. You will still have moments of insecurity, but they will no longer control the direction of your life. That is emotional maturity. Not becoming invulnerable, becoming anchored. The mature person does not say, "Nobody's opinion matters." They say, "Other people's opinions matter, but they do not define me." The mature person does not say, "I don't need anyone." They say, "I can love people without making them responsible for my sense of self." The mature person does not say, "I will always choose myself." They say, "I will not abandon myself simply to keep someone else." That is the difference between selfishness and self-respect. And perhaps this is the deeper meaning behind putting yourself first. You are not putting yourself above everyone. You are putting yourself back into your own life. For a long time, maybe you have been standing outside yourself, watching how people react, watching who succeeds, watching who gets chosen, watching who receives attention, watching whether you are doing enough, watching whether you are attractive enough, watching whether you are successful enough, watching whether people approve. And while you were watching, life was happening. Your own life, the one you were supposed to inhabit. This is why the return to yourself can feel almost unfamiliar. At first, you may not know what you want. That is okay. If you have spent years asking what everyone else wants, your own answer may be quiet. Do not force it. Begin with smaller questions. What gives me energy? What drains me? What do I keep pretending to enjoy? What do I do only because I want to be admired? What am I afraid to admit? Where am I saying yes while hoping someone will notice that I wanted to say no? What would I choose if nobody could see it? What would I stop doing if nobody could judge me? And perhaps the most important question: if nobody approved of this choice, would I still believe it was right for me? Do not rush to answer. Sit with it. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive as a dramatic revelation. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet discomfort. Sometimes you suddenly realize that you have been pursuing something for years because you wanted to prove that you were worthy. Sometimes you realize that the person you were trying so hard to impress has never actually been the person you needed to impress. Sometimes you realize that you have spent years trying to become someone who would finally receive the approval you were already allowed to give yourself. And that realization can be painful. But it can also be liberating, because you cannot build a peaceful life while constantly asking the outside world to authorize your existence. At some point, you have to become willing to say, "This is my life." Not in arrogance, in responsibility. This is my life. I have to live with my decisions. I have to wake up inside my own mind. I have to carry the consequences. I have to experience the relationship. I have to live with the career. I have to feel the choices. So I cannot allow everyone else to make decisions for a life they will not have to live. That is not selfish. That is adulthood. And when you begin living from that place, something else happens. You become more generous, not less. Because when you are no longer desperately seeking approval, you can give without keeping score. You can help someone without needing them to praise you. You can love without constantly asking what you will receive. You can listen without immediately needing to be understood. You can support someone else's success without using it to measure your own. You can celebrate someone without secretly comparing yourself to them. Why? Because your worth is no longer a limited resource. You do not need someone else to become smaller for you to feel significant. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to be the most attractive person in the room. You do not need to have the most impressive life. You do not need to convince everyone that you are right. You simply need to remain connected to yourself. And this is where the paradox becomes beautiful. The less you need approval, the more genuinely connected you can become. Because now, when you say yes, it can be a real yes. When you say I love you, it does not secretly mean, please prove that I am worthy. When you give, it does not secretly mean, please give me recognition. When you stay, it does not secretly mean, please don't abandon me. And when you leave, it does not mean, I am punishing you. It can simply mean, this is no longer aligned with who I am. There is freedom in that, a quiet kind of freedom, not the freedom of having no responsibilities, the freedom of no longer needing to betray yourself to meet them. So perhaps the question is not whether you should stop caring about what other people think. That may be impossible, and it may not even be desirable. The deeper question is, who gets the final vote in my life? Does every criticism get a vote? Does every compliment get a vote? Does every rejection get a vote? Does every social expectation get a vote? Does every person's disappointment get a vote? Or do you finally begin bringing those voices together inside yourself and asking, what do I actually believe? What do I value? What kind of person am I trying to become? What life can I respect, even if nobody applauds it? That is the beginning of inner authority. And inner authority is very different from ego. The ego wants to prove. Inner authority does not need to perform. The ego wants to be seen as strong. Inner authority can admit weakness. The ego wants to win. Inner authority wants to be honest. The ego asks, how do I look? Inner authority asks, is this true? That is the movement from external identity toward inner coherence. And perhaps that is the deepest psychological transformation of all. You stop living as a collection of reactions. You become a person with an inner center. The world does not disappear. People do not disappear. Relationships do not disappear. You simply stop making them the place where your identity is decided. You can still listen. You can still learn. You can still change. But you change because you have become conscious, not because you are terrified of rejection. You grow because you recognize something is no longer right, not because someone told you that you were inadequate. You pursue something because it has meaning, not because you need the world to admire you for pursuing it. And eventually you may experience a moment that is almost impossible to notice from the outside. You receive criticism, and you pause before believing it. You receive praise, and you enjoy it without becoming dependent on it. Someone becomes distant, and you feel the pain without immediately chasing them. Someone misunderstands you, and you communicate if necessary, without desperately needing to control their opinion. You make a choice, and for once, you do not immediately look around to see whether everyone agrees. You simply know, not with arrogance, not with certainty about everything, but with enough inner trust to move forward. And that may be what it truly means to put yourself first, not to become the center of everyone else's world, to become present in your own, because perhaps you have spent too long trying to be chosen by people, chosen by relationships, chosen by opportunities, chosen by society, chosen by an audience, chosen by someone whose approval you thought would finally make you feel complete. But there is a moment when the entire question changes. Instead of asking, will they choose me? You begin asking, do I choose this? Instead of asking, do they approve of me? You ask, do I respect the person I am becoming? Instead of asking, do they understand me? You ask, am I being honest with myself? And instead of asking, how do I make them stay? You ask, what kind of relationship allows me to remain myself? That is a different life, a quieter life, a more conscious life. And perhaps the most beautiful part is that you do not have to become someone completely different to live it. You simply have to stop abandoning the person who has been there underneath the performance, the person underneath the mask, the person underneath the comparison, the person underneath the need to be impressive, the person underneath the fear of disappointing everyone. That person may not be loud, they may not have a perfect plan, they may not know exactly where life is going, but they have something the external world cannot give you, an inner direction. So the next time you feel the urge to seek approval, pause. Before you send the message, before you explain yourself, before you change your decision, before you compare your life, before you ask whether they are impressed, before you look outside yourself for the answer. Pause and ask one simple question. What do I think? Not what will they think, not what would make them happy, not what would make me look successful, not what would make me easier to love. What do I think? What do I feel? What do I value? What is true for me? At first, the answer may be difficult to hear, but keep listening, because the goal was never to stop caring about everyone else. The goal was to stop disappearing inside everyone else's expectations. And when you finally begin to put yourself first, something changes that other people may not even notice. You become less reactive, less desperate to prove, less afraid of being misunderstood, less dependent on praise, less shaken by rejection. You begin to understand that another person's approval can add warmth to your life, but it cannot be the foundation of it. You can accept love without begging for it. You can receive criticism without becoming criticism. You can experience rejection without becoming rejected in your own mind. You can be misunderstood without abandoning your truth. And you can walk through the world with an open heart without leaving yourself behind. That is not selfishness. That is integration. That is the return to yourself. So if you have spent years trying to be everything everyone needed, perhaps you do not need to become better at pleasing them. Perhaps you need to become better at hearing yourself. If you have spent years trying to prove that you are enough, perhaps the next chapter is not another achievement. Perhaps it is learning to stop asking for proof. If you have spent years waiting for someone else to choose you, perhaps the most important choice is the one you make privately, when nobody is watching. You choose your values, you choose your boundaries, you choose your direction. You choose what deserves your energy, and most importantly, you choose not to abandon yourself simply because someone else may not understand. That is where approval loses its power, not when you stop caring, but when you stop needing it to tell you who you are. And maybe one day, someone will disagree with you, and you will remain calm. Someone will walk away, and you will grieve without losing yourself. Someone will criticize you, and you will listen without collapsing. Someone will praise you, and you will smile without needing more. Someone will not choose you, and you will still choose yourself, and in that moment, you may finally understand what putting yourself first was always supposed to mean. It was never about placing yourself above everyone else. It was about refusing to place yourself beneath everyone else. It was about returning the center of your life to the one person who has to live it every single day, you. So perhaps you do not need to forget everyone else. Perhaps you simply need to remember yourself. And once you remember yourself, you can return to the world differently. Not desperate to be seen, not desperate to be approved, not desperate to be chosen, but present, grounded, conscious, able to love without losing yourself, able to listen without surrendering yourself, able to walk away without hating anyone, able to stay without betraying yourself. And perhaps that is the quiet freedom that comes when you finally stop seeking permission to be who you are. The world can have its opinions. People can have their expectations. Others can misunderstand your choices. They can approve. They can disapprove. They can stay. They can leave.